NASCAR announced a ton of rule changes today. There is some interest from some OEMs about joining NASCAR, and 2311 Racing is teasing a potential third car that could run throughout 2024. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We got one paint scheme to take a look at, and it's Noah Gragson's 2024 Rush Truck Center scheme. I am not a big fan of this paint scheme. It looks like a test car. They could have done a lot more on this scheme. They could have had the brown, they could have had all the colors that we've seen with Chase Briscoe's scheme, and instead they had a base gray scheme that we're going to see at the Clash with Rush Truck Centers on the side. I'm not a fan of this. This looks plain. It looks way too simple in my opinion. Well, not simple. It just looks like a test car. I'd rather see them do a better job on this, and I think overall they did a bad job, and it does not look very good, and it's not a good paint scheme overall, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about 3Chi. Now, I think I talked about this on the channel last Friday, but according to jski.com, 3Chi is hoping to return to Richard Childress Racing in 2024. Remember, Zone Nicotine Pouches is going to be sponsoring Rich Childress Racing and Kyle Busch for a majority of the season in 2024, with him that being the anchor sponsor. The number of races is not officially disclosed, but there's a lot of unknowns how many races exactly that they're going to sponsor. A lot of people had thought that 3Chi was going to be gone. Originally, Bob Pockers had reported that 3Chi was going to be gone, but that is not going to be the case. Hope is for 3Chi at some point to come back in 2024. I hope they stick around because they're still advertising the Kyle Busch car, so I really hope it does make a return in 2024. It's a little unclear and unknown what the case will be for that, but as of right now, it's still a little bit unknown. Hopefully they do make a return, but it's still not official if they are coming back or not, but they are hoping to make a return in 2024 on their car. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Matchbox 20. As it was announced earlier today that Matchbox 20 will perform the pre-race concert at the Coca-Cola 600. Matchbox 20, known for songs for How Far We've Come, 3 a.m., Unwell, among other songs. They haven't been as relevant over the course of the last 10 years, but they still have released a lot of songs that many of you probably know. It is really cool that they are going to be doing the pre-race concert for the Coca-Cola 600. I do like a lot of their music. Their newest stuff, not as much, but a lot of their 90s and early 2000s and mid-2000s stuff, I think is actually really good to listen to. So I think if you're going to the Coca-Cola 600, it's exciting. I'd love to see like Morgan Wallen and Luke Combs do some pre-race concerts for NASCAR, but it is awesome to see that Matchbox 20 is going to be coming to do the pre-race concert. I like it a lot overall, and I think it is pretty cool that they are going to be entering and doing the pre-race concert. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ricko Racing. As it was announced earlier today that Ricko Racing will be entering the Mazda MX-5 Cup in 2024 with Preston Pardus and Cody Ware as the drivers. Ricko Racing continues to expand their empire. They've, of course, been working with the IndyCar with Dale Coyne Racing. They haven't announced what drivers will be with Dale Coyne Racing this season. They've also got working in IMSA currently at the moment, and, of course, NASCAR. And, of course, I think they're doing the NHRA as well with Clay Milliken still. And now they'll be in Mazda MX-5 Cup with Preston Pardus. This could open up some opportunities at Preston Pardus, maybe potentially running some races with this team and this organization in the Cup Series in the future, or maybe an Xfinity program. But it's really cool that Ricko Racing will be, in fact, entering in the Mazda MX-5 Cup Series of Preston Pardus, a very good and talented driver. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Wayne Auden. As it was confirmed today that Wayne Auden, unfortunately for him, 2024 will be his last year as the Xfinity Series race director. Wayne Auden has been the Xfinity Series race director for a very long time, I think for the last maybe 15 to 20 years, or at least for the last 2 years, and he's done a really good job as the race director for the Xfinity Series. I can't remember exactly who's going to be taking over, but Wayne is not going to be retiring from working in NASCAR. He's just no longer going to be the race director for an Xfinity, as they're going to be changing who that race director is going to be. Overall, congratulations to Wayne on a very successful career as a race director, and hopefully he can do a really good job continuing to work in the sport in a different position in 2025, as of course Xfinity also will be leaving at the end of the year to do some other stuff. We know Wayne Auden will not be there for 2025. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Xfinity Series. As according to it was announced today that for the Xfinity Series, 1 to 2 car teams will only have one backup car. And for 3+ car teams, they will have 2 backup cars. And according to reports, you have to basically choose a base color for those backup cars. The reason this is coming into play is kind of similar to the 9+ gallon cans are going to be coming into play for Xfinity. It is to save the teams a lot of money. Obviously, the costs are going up for all the series, not just for the Cup Series, but also Xfinity Series and Truck Series have had to increase a lot of things, and the costs have gotten up a lot more as well. And they're limiting the amount of backup cars that are going to be coming into play for that. This is definitely an interesting rule change for sure, but it's not a surprising rule change to see. I'm not massively the biggest fan of this overall, limiting the amount of backup cars, but if it's to save the team's money, it is what it is. I think it is a good decision to try to limit how much money, not limit, but I would love to see more purse money, hopefully with the new deal that's coming in with the CW. Hopefully we can see more money coming in for this series so we can maybe have more backup cars in the future. But overall, it's not a major surprise or shock to see that they are making this change because they do want to try to go ahead and save the teams at least a little bit of money, though costs have been going up in a pretty massive way over the course of the last few years. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. As Shane Van Gisbergen spoke to the media at the NMPA before the NMPA Awards happened, which is the National Media Press Association Awards, basically he says he is excited for 2024 and he's ready to get the season rolling. Shane Van Gisbergen is going to be running full-time in the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Childress Racing in the number 97 car. Will also run select NASCAR Cup Series races with Trackhouse Racing and also run some races in ARCA and maybe run some select Truck Series races as well. There's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around Shane Van Gisbergen going into the season. I want everyone to be realistic here, though. I'm not expecting Shane Van Gisbergen to be an absolute championship threat and contender in 2024. I think he's going to be good. I think by the end of the year, he'll be an outside contender for winning a lot of races, but I don't expect him to be as strong on the ovals. But I think he's a good enough driver that can get up to the wheel very quickly. It is exciting to see that he will be behind the wheel. He brings a lot of energy and excitement to the NASCAR Xfinity Series. He got a really exciting Xfinity Series team at Childress Racing this year. But overall, I think a lot of people have to have realistic expectations, especially when it comes to Shane Van Gisbergen going to season. But I'm excited to see what he can do this year in 2024 with Childress Racing. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Triple Truck Challenge. As the races for the Triple Truck Challenge have been revealed, they're going to be the same races as last season. The first race will be at Charlotte, the second race will be at Gateway, also known as Worldwide Technology Raceway, and the third race is going to be at National Super Speedway. These are the same 3 races that were part of the Triple Truck Challenge last year. If you win the whole thing and get all 3 wins, I believe you win $500,000. For winning the first race is $50K. I think it's $25K or something. And if you win all 3, you get a ton of money. So it's really exciting for the Truck Series of bringing it back, and it's good and more money coming to play for the Truck Series, especially for these smaller teams. I like it a lot. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Dash for Cash, as their races have also been revealed for 2024. The 4 races are going to be Martinsville, Texas, Talladega, and Dover. The only change is Texas coming in and replacing as the second date for the Dash for Cash. Dash for Cash has been around for the last 15 years, and it's been extremely successful, helping out a lot of drivers and a lot of teams. If you finish in the top 4 in the qualifier race, which I think is going to be a Circuit of the Americas this year, or maybe Richmond, you'll be able to qualify in to the top 4 for that. It's good money for the teams. I love a Dash for Cash event. It's really fun that they're bringing it back once again. I've always enjoyed it and glad to see that it will be returning for 2024. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Daytona and Watkins Glen. There's going to be some changes that are going to be coming to those racetracks for 2024. First, NASCAR will be doing more paving in the area of the Ryan Preece crash. They've already started working on that before the Rolex 24 happened. During the Rolex 24 test, they noticed that they were working on paving that backstretch area. But it was also announced today as well for Watkins Glen that they are going to be removing the rumble strips at the bus stop at the Watkins Glen. But they are going to be adding rumble areas in Turn 1 at Watkins Glen. Let's go through all of this. Obviously, one of the reasons that they're basically trying to pave it is because of the flip that happened with Ryan Preece, one of the scariest accidents we've ever seen, and they're trying to remove as much grass as possible because a lot of people in NASCAR believe that the grass was a massive and huge reason why the flip ended up taking place, the way it ended up taking place. As for Watkins Glen, removing the rumble strips in the backstretch, not a good decision in my opinion. I think removing him for the bus stop is not a good look for the sport. I think it's a bad decision to do that. The bus stop, it's been there for a long time, so why are we removing that when it's been there for as long as it's been? Because you're going to create some potential chaos that could end up taking place. As for adding the rumble strip at turn number 1, that's a good move in my opinion. Because last year, these guys were going almost all the way into the inside wall. Because everyone was trying to make as much pass as possible and trying to be as aggressive as they possibly could be. Overall, there's some good changes here and some bad changes here, but personally, I'm not the biggest fan of them getting rid of those rumble strips. I'm not a big fan of it, and overall, I think it is a bad move in certain instances of what they're doing, but there's also some good changes coming out from this overall, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series. As NASCAR confirmed today that the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series will have every single race will have live competitive pit stops. Remember, over the course of the last couple of years, really since like 2020 or 2021, NASCAR has not been doing live pit stops for non-competitive races. What do I mean by that? Well, last couple of years, sometimes the Cup Series will be at a different track like Gateway, and when the Xfinity Series been like at Portland, they've had non-competitive pit stops because a lot of these crew members have not been at the racetrack. The main crew members are at, of course, the Cup Series race. So obviously, of course, they're going to bring non-competitive teams. Well, now they're going to have to be required to bring a lot more of those competitive teams to be focused, because also remember they have removed a couple tracks off the Xfinity Series and Truck Series schedule. Remember, Mid-Ohio is no longer on the Truck Series schedule, and a lot of these tracks are now mostly closer to the NASCAR Cup Series, meaning that these teams could travel a lot easier and bring their pit crews out. I think I like this decision a lot more because it's going to shorten the race up for Xfinity just a little bit. I think that with these non-competitive pit stops, like 5 minutes, and sometimes I got really bored watching the non-competitive live pit stops, hurt my score a little bit of these races because of those non-competitive live pit stops. I understand that they wanted to be a little more cheaper for the teams, but I think having competitive pit stops, especially with some of the teams that don't have as strong of people at the race at that point, it makes a lot more sense to make this move. So I think it's a good decision by NASCAR, and I'm glad to see that for every single race for trucks in Xfinity, they will have live competitive pit stops in 2024. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about race control. As it was confirmed earlier today that NASCAR is planning to build a remote race control from its new building in Concord, North Carolina. This got a lot of talking for understandable reasons because a lot of people do not like the fact that NASCAR is already talking about remote race control. Now, one thing that also does need to be clarified, though, is that NASCAR, while yes, they're still planning to build a remote race control that they're going to use later in the season, they're still planning to send a lot of the crew officials and a lot of the race control actually out to the racetrack. It's kind of similar to the MLB does, where they kind of have umpires and they have like control that's kind of like in New York and Cooperstown. So it's kind of like the way they're going to do it, if I'm not mistaken. I could be entirely wrong, but I think this is the way they're going to do it. Again, we've been seeing this a lot more. They've got the new production facility that's been built, and they're hoping to have this new remote control thing so people can be there. And maybe what this could also do is bring new people in that can be part of race control. Bring new faces in, that bring new perspectives, and bring that in as well. It's interesting. I think a lot of it will be tested first with the Xfinity Series and Truck Series, but I would have to imagine by the end of the season, the Cup Series is going to have this brought in. So it's very interesting, definitely, for sure, to see that they're doing this, and I kind of find it definitely interesting, a little weird to say the least, but nonetheless, it's kind of interesting to see that they will be basically doing this remote stuff in 2024. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Marco Andretti. is it was announced earlier today that Marco Andretti will be entering the 2024 Indianapolis 500, driving the number 98 car with Andretti Global. This will now be the 19th consecutive year that Marco Andretti has attempted to make the Indy 500, and he's made it every single year. He usually runs one IndyCar race, which of course is always in the number 98 car. Remember, he won the pole for the Indy 500 a few years ago, back I believe in 2020, and now he has a chance to run it once again in 2024. What's really exciting about this also is, of course, he's going to be competing in NASCAR this season. He's going to be driving for Ricko Racing in the Truck Series of 7 races with an alliance with Cook Racing Technologies, and also is going to be running 14 ARCA races throughout this year, and is going to run a couple ARCA East and West races as well in 2024. It has also been announced that the sponsor that he has will be working with Kyle Kirkwood throughout the 2024 IndyCar season. So I think that's actually really exciting and something, if you're a fan of Kyle Kirkwood, he's got a sponsor now for 2024. I'm excited to see Marco Andretti run the Indy 500 again. I think Marco has a legit shot to win. At some point, he's going to win the Indy 500. We always know how good he is at Indy. He almost won in his rookie year. He's come close to winning it multiple different times. I go back to 2013 where he's up front. I go back to 2014 where he's up front. He's ran really good in those races. So I expect Marco to be pretty competitive if he can make the show. We're not exactly sure how many cars are going to show up for the Indy 500 in 2024, but I'm excited to see that Marco is, in fact, coming back to the Indy 500 once again. We all expected this was going to happen because he usually runs one race every year, and that's Indy. It could hurt that he doesn't really run it full-time anymore, but with how good he's been at Indianapolis, I think Marco does have a really solid and a really good opportunity here to be solid and competitive in the 2024 Indianapolis 500. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ram Brothers Racing. As it was announced on Tuesday that the Ram Brothers Racing has acquired 3 sets of owners points for 2024. They have acquired the owners points from Motori Racing, the number 16 truck, which is 19th in the owners points. They've acquired the 22 owners points from AM Racing, which I think was 22nd or 23rd or lower in the points. And they have acquired the points from On Point Motorsports, meaning that Ram will field 3 trucks throughout 2024. We obviously know Lawless Allen's going to be full-time, so he won't have to worry about failing to qualify at least at the start of the season. This also may have confirmed, not officially, but this kind of has confirmed some of the rumors and rumblings going around that Motori Racing may be shutting down their Truck Series program to go focus on maybe going in IMSA in the GT4 class has been brought up in recent months. And then, of course, AM Racing, they're focusing a lot of their focus on the Xfinity Series going into this year with Hailie Deegan. And then On Point Motorsports, they really haven't been around much in the last year or so. They've been around less and less. So I think it's not a surprise to see if this move is happening. Is this one to see that Ram is taking the owners' points? Have been cool to see Spire do it, or maybe Rev do it, considering some announcements that might be coming in a not so distant future with Rev and Spire with certain drivers that we'll get into later in the week potentially. But it's interesting to see that Ram has acquired these owners' points as they look to build a lot more competitive portfolio. Hopefully they can show up a lot more competitive, because they have struggled over the course of the last few years, and they failed to qualify for many races over the course of the last couple of years. We'll see if they can improve, but honestly, I'm not as confident that is going to happen. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Brett Holmes. As it was announced on Friday afternoon that Brett Holmes will be running full-time in the Truck Series in 2024, driving the number 32 truck for, of course, Brett Holmes Racing. They are going to have a technical alliance with Spire Motorsports. Remember, Spire Motorsports bought up KBM, and they all have a technical alliance, like I said, with Spire. And Mike Shiplett, who worked with Cole Custer and RCR over the last couple seasons, will be the crew chief for Brett Holmes this season. I'm really excited to see Brett Holmes back full-time. There was a lot of struggles and worry about sponsorship for Brett Holmes in 2023. It's good to see that they are going to be running full-time in 2024. I think they're going to have to worry about owners' points just a little bit at the start of the season, but they still ran really solidly in certain races throughout the year. The big question right now, again, other big thing is Mike Shiplett being the crew chief. Mike Shiplett was really awesome with Cole Custer back in 2018 and 2019, and then, of course, went with Cole Custer up to the Cup Series in 2020. They won a race, but he struggled a few years, and Mike Shiplett was fired at the end of 2022. And they made some changes with that, where Cole Custer went back to Xfinity, and then Mike went to work with RCR, and we saw the improvement from Childress Racing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. What are my expectations of Brett Holmes? I think Holmes will be solid. I don't think it'll be spectacular. I think they'll have some solid performances throughout the year, but I'm not expecting them to set the world on fire throughout the 2024 season. So nonetheless, I'm glad to see that Brett Holmes is back in the Truck Series in 2024. It's not a new team, it's an old team that's been around, but I love seeing teams like that come back. I'm excited about it, and I'm very happy that they are going to be, in fact, returning this year and running the full season. Hopefully they can make every single race and show up to every single event in the 2024 NASCAR Truck Series season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. Now, there's an announcement that came out today that NASCAR will likely, as it says, they will likely not require Kyle Larson to make the driver's meeting at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Now, why are they not going to require Kyle Larson to do this? Well, there's one big key reason. Kyle Larson in 2024 is going to be attempting the double. He'll be the first person to attempt the double since we saw Kurt Busch do back in 2014, where Kurt Busch almost actually was able to compete it. Remember, he actually finished 6th with Andretti Autosport, and unfortunately had an engine failure with around 100 laps to go in the Coca-Cola 600. Well, he's running pretty competitive, if I remember correctly. But what's different is a lot of these other drivers have done it, like Robbie Gordon and Kurt Busch, have all had to start at the rear of the field. But honestly, I saw a lot of backlash on this that Kyle Larson won't be required. But look, especially if Kyle Larson is able to win the Indy 500, he probably will miss the driver's meeting. Even though the race is starting a little earlier than it used to back when the last time they did this, I think it's a good decision to go ahead and make sure to be safe. One of the things that definitely could help is the fact if it does rain at the Coke 600 like it did this past year, it might help a little bit in that regard. But to me, I have really no issue with this, and I really don't see the net why a lot of people are upset about this. I get it in some instances, and it makes a little sense why people are at least a little bit upset about it. But look, man, it's Kyle Larson. He wants to attempt to run the Indy 500, and he's got a really good chance to win both races. I think he's got a really good chance to win both. He's going to be very fast, extremely competitive, and I think a lot of fans are excited for Kyle Larson to do this. Again, I think a lot of people feel like he's getting privileged because he drives for Hendrick Motorsports. Saw a couple of those comments, but that's not why Kyle Larson is getting this opportunity here, and I think he's going to do a really solid job in the Indy 500. I saw this backlash. I really never understood why they had the backlash for Larson, because I think it's huge for the sport, and I think it's good for the sport that Kyle Larson is going to do this year. I'm excited about it, and I'm definitely looking forward to it for sure this upcoming season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, there were a couple things that Kyle Busch spoke to Bob Pockrass on over during basically the production days for Fox and also NASCAR, and Kyle Busch spoke on Rowdy Energy shutting down. Remember, it was announced not that long ago that Rowdy Energy was going to be shutting their doors at the end of this month. Now, there's a lot of speculation that due to the new lawsuit that they received, that was a big reason why they decided to shut down. Well, Kyle Busch says that is not entirely true. He says that the talks actually began last spring about shutting down all the way back in May, in March, and April, and talks were beginning back then to shut down the Rowdy Energy production. And the reason being is because sales had gone down. Look, when it comes to Rowdy Energy, and I can say this, when I basically used to see Rowdy Energy a lot at Walmarts and Quick Trips, but about at the start of 2023, I started seeing a lot less Rowdy Energy. And the same thing goes for Walmart. They had a lot of Rowdy Energy up until about May or June of last year, and then they just started diminishing how much Rowdy Energy was actually showing up on the shelves. And I think a big reason for that is because sales were dropping at a pretty rapid rate. And again, you have the lawsuit that's coming in for KBM and Kyle Busch especially, which they're going to fight this lawsuit in the courts, it sounds like. But overall, when it comes to that, and a lot of people are kind of confused thinking, the regular Rowdy Energy cans did have the lead and mercury in them, which again, it was the Power Burn cans. It was not the regular cans. So if you drink the regular cans, you should be fine. It was from the Power Burn cans. It's sad to see Rowdy Energy go. Maybe Kyle Busch revises in the next few years. I don't think that's going to happen, though, because Kyle Busch has a lot of things he's focused on right now. He sold a lot of stuff like, of course, KBM and also Rowdy Manufacturing, and also Rowdy Energy is sadly, unfortunately, gone. I'm glad to see that Kyle Busch cleared up a lot of that confusion, though, because, again, there's a lot of people that believe that Kyle Busch basically sold and shut down the program because of that, and that is not why they shut it down. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Sage Karam. As it was announced earlier today that Sage Karam will drive the number 26 car for Sam Hunt Racing at Daytona International Speedway. He'll have CRC brake lean on the car. First of all, the paint scheme that he's going to be running looks absolutely phenomenal. He is also now the third driver that has been confirmed for the number 26 car this season. Remember, Jeff Earnhardt is going to run quite a few races also in the number 26 car, his first race being at Atlanta Motor Speedway. And Corey Heim will also be behind the wheel of the number 26 car at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. When it comes to Sage Karam, he made a couple select starts with Sam Hunt Racing last year. Remember, he actually had a very impressive performance at Road America, was in contention to win. I think he led coming to the white flag of the race and put on a really good show, ran top 5 all day long, which was really, really impressive. The number of races that Sage has been announced to has not been disclosed, but I would expect that he'll probably run at least 5 or 6 races with this team, probably a lot of road course races, and probably some super speedway races as well. But I'm really glad to see that Sage Karam is getting the opportunity and shot to drive this number 26 car once again. He's a very talented driver, in my opinion. I know some disagree with me because a lot of people don't look at his IndyCar days, but he was pretty solid in IndyCar too at times. He did have some solid runs, and I think coming over to NASCAR, I think he will do a very, very good job with this team in 2024 in the race that he is able to run. I expect him to contend for a potential outside shot at winning. Especially if we go back to some of these road course races, I think he'll be an underdog to win road course races this year because he was really good at road courses with Jordan Anderson and also now driving for Sam Hunt. So I'm excited about this and nonetheless glad to see that he'll be joining up with Sam Hunt Racing in 2024. I think he'll absolutely make the best of it and perform extremely well in the 2024 NASCAR Xfinity Series season. I think he's going to be a really strong threat throughout this upcoming season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the EV race car. This was a pretty massive story that was announced earlier today as NASCAR will be having a demonstration and will be debuting its EV race car at the Busch Light Clash. Now the biggest thing to know, they are not going to be racing this car. It is just going to be run as a demonstration. And David Reagan is going to be getting behind the wheel of this car. Now, it needs to be known they did a 3-day test at Martinsville not too long ago, and David Reagan was the driver of that test, and I think they did 340 laps in one single run, and they also did this over the course of 3 days, and they got a lot of time on the racetrack. Now, there's been a lot of complaints about the noise with the EV race car. Now, NASCAR has addressed this. Again, NASCAR said this publicly, that they're not getting rid of the noise. There's also a lot of talks and conversations about potentially a hydrogen-based car instead of an electric race car. Obviously, there's going to be a lot going on with the LA Busch Light Clash. You're going to, of course, have the NASCAR Mexico Series that is going to be taking place there in 2024, which is not that far away from now. That's going to be happening on that Sunday. And you also now have this EV race car demonstration that is going to be going on. Again, NASCAR is not going to be going full electric anytime soon. The plan is maybe in the long term down the road they do, maybe like in 5 to 10 years. But I think with how kind of unsufferable, how crazy the car market is right now, and unknown how the car market's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and how basically everything is with electric stuff at the moment, there's just not enough. The grid is not sustainable right now for a full electric series. It wouldn't make any sense to go to a full electric series currently at this particular moment. So I don't think there is going to be a full electric series anytime down the road, despite what a lot of people are going to say. I don't think there will be a full electric series, at least for the near future. Nonetheless, they'll debut this EV race car. We'll see what kind of things and notes we get from this. Maybe NASCAR takes some of these electric components, which they are talking about adding electric components to the next-gen cars, which could be one of the ways we do find a way to increase horsepower, which I think would be a solid move for the sport. Nonetheless, it's going to be interesting to see how this car does perform when it does its demonstration here in the next 10 to 11 days. It'll be interesting, and it might be also exciting, though a lot of people may not agree with me on that, on the exciting part. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Money Team. As the Money Team has confirmed to TobyChristie.com and Joseph Wrigley that they will not be entering the 2024 Daytona 500. They have been talking about entering the Daytona 500 this year, and they're one of the names that will, in fact, not be entering a car in this year's Daytona 500. According to the Joseph Wrigley report, it sounds like that as of right now, the plan is for them to run this car starting at Las Vegas Motor Speedway, with the driver being TBD or to be announced. it's definitely unfortunate to see that this team is not showing up. They have not raced, I believe, since Circuit of the Americas when they had Connor Daly behind the wheel. The goal for this team is to run 7 or 8 NASCAR Cup Series races in 2024, but they also hope in 2025 to run full time. Now, obviously, with Daytona, I think it makes a lot of sense of why they may not be entering the Daytona 500, considering how many competitive cars there are going to be at Daytona. I don't think the money team feels like they can make the show. They got very lucky to make it last year, and I think focusing on just going to Vegas where there's going to be less cars showing up, it does make a lot more sense there. Now, obviously, what drivers could be behind the wheel? Maybe Jeffrey Earnhardt perhaps could be a candidate. Maybe out of nowhere, Matt DiBenedetto. Maybe somehow Carl Edwards comes out of retirement and drives SC. I really don't know for sure at this point. But again, a lot of people think the money team, they're shutting down, and that is not the case. They do plan to show up at Las Vegas. We'll see who they choose. It's a shame that they're not going to be at the Daytona 500, but that's one name you can take off that unfortunately will not be at this year's Daytona 500 2024. And as much as I think a lot of us would agree, it'd be awesome to see the money team show up. I think them putting their focus on Daytona 500 will be very, very difficult to kind of watch. So we'll see how things end up going down and turning out. But as of right now, the money team will not be entering the Daytona 500 in 2024, which once again is kind of disappointing, but not surprising or shocking, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Cup qualifying. As NASCAR has officially announced a new Cup qualifying procedure that is going to be starting in 2024. Now, NASCAR is still going to be continuing the knockout round qualifying that they have been doing, but things are going to be changing. So the top 10, obviously the top 5 from each of those rounds are automatically going to lock into the final, and they'll kind of determine how they've been doing the last 2 years. But NASCAR is changing the rules from row 6 to row number 20. So they'll set it a little differently. So Group A will determine the outside row for row 6 to row number 20, or row 18 if only 36 cars show up. For Group B, we'll determine inside row for rows 6 for 20. The reason that NASCAR is doing this starting in 2024 is they feel like is that no group can have a major advantage. We saw this in multiple races and multiple qualifying sessions, especially in the Southern 500, where Group A had a massive advantage over Group number B. And I think a driver from Group number A or Group B was able to win the pole. What this will do is it will get rid of that huge advantage that one of these groups has and instead make it a lot more even. Now, personally, if you were to ask me how I would determine a qualifying session, I just go back to single car qualifying like the Truck Series and Xfinity Series has and do it like that instead of making it a lot more complicated. But at least in my opinion, this is a little more simplistic and less complicated. It's kind of similar how IndyCar has done their qualifying sessions. I think this is kind of how they determine how they do their qualifying by their knockout system. Look, I understand NASCAR wants to have a show for all their qualifying sessions, but personally, if I had to choose a qualifying format, I would go back to single car qualifying for every single race. We don't need to make everything a spectacle in the show, and if you gave these guys a lot more horsepower, especially for qualifying, I think you would see a much better product, especially for the qualifying sessions. But you know what? This isn't the end of the world if you ask me. This is better than what we had because, again, I think it's interesting the way they're doing this. Again, rows 1 through 5, nothing's going to be changing. It's just going to be rows number 6 through 10, which I think is kind of interesting to say the least. I don't know how many times NASCAR has changed a qualifying format, but at this point, can we go back to single car qualifying? I would love that a lot more than what we're going to be doing for this upcoming season. For the Cup Series, Xfinity and Trucks, they're going to be staying the same. Cup, though, we'll be having some pretty big changes for the 2024 season. It's interesting for sure, to definitely say the least, but it's definitely something to keep your eyes out on for sure. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kaz Grala. I did a video talk about this earlier today or yesterday when you're watching this, but it was confirmed early this morning that Kaz Grala will be driving the number 36 car for Farmer Motorsports in the Daytona 500 with Rude Bush as a sponsor. This now will confirm that it will be a 41st entry for the Daytona 500, and now this will confirm Kaz Grala will have 26 NASCAR races in 2024. Because remember, Kaz Grala will also be running 25 races with Ricko Racing in the NASCAR Cup Series. As for Kaz, this is an amazing opportunity for him. He's going to be with a really strong team. He does have to qualify his way into the Daytona 500 this year, but I think that Kaz does have a phenomenal and great opportunity to make the Daytona 500 on pure pace and speed. Remember, this 36 car almost won the pole at the most recent race at Daytona. If I'm not mistaken, Riley Herbst either started on the front row or started in third or fourth, which was extremely impressive. And I think Kaz is a good super speedway racer, so I think he's going to make the most out of it. And I think he will easily be able to make it in on, on Wednesday during the qualifying sessions. But if he does end up being in the top two or doesn't end up being there, he'll probably make it in on the race because he's probably not only going to be getting help from the front row teams, but he's probably going to be getting help from Harrison Burton and also Team Penske. Why did I mention Team Penske and Harrison Burton, not RFK? Well, you have to remember now, Farmer Motorsports has changed their allegiance and alliance. Instead of working with RFK this season, they are going to be going over to work with Team Penske this year to try to stay a lot more competitive. And I think that is really going to help them out on the super speedways in a pretty major and huge way. I am excited to see this for Kaz though. Again, I think this is a phenomenal opportunity for him that he's going to get to work with front row. And I would also not be surprised or shocked if you see him in the other super speedway races that he's not scheduled for. They didn't officially unveil what his schedule exactly will look like, but I think Kaz is going to run more races than we initially thought. I think it's cool that he's driving for Rick Ware, and I wonder what else is going to be happening with the other teams and such. And the other big question is who's going to drive the 15 car at this point. I would think Riley Herbst maybe drives a 15 car for Rick Ware. Maybe they get someone out of nowhere to give an opportunity and a shot to drive there. Maybe they get maybe Cole Custer, Riley Herbst, or Haley Deegan or something will drive in that seat. We'll see what happens in regards to the 15 car and who goes in that seat, but Kaz will be, in fact, in the number 36 car for the Daytona 500. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next major story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona 500 entry list. Now, I've already talked about basically the Daytona 500 and Kaz entering. But Bob Pockrass added a post earlier after the Kaz announcement happened and basically says that he's not expecting a lot of teams to show up. But he does mention that NY Racing may enter the Daytona 500 and they're still working on their 2024 plans. But according to Bob Pockrass, 2311 Racing, Trackhouse Racing, and College Racing are not expected to enter a third car. Now, we already know that the Money Team will not be entering a third car in the Daytona 500. They confirmed that earlier today, so they will not be entering a car. But it sounds like the 2311 Racing, Trackhouse, and College will not be entering a third car, which is really, really unfortunate. There have been a lot of chatter that even if AJ Allmendinger was going to drive the number 16 car, they still was talking they may bring the number 13 car. Some had thought maybe Matt DiBenedetto was going to get that seat. We already know Matt DiBenedetto, he's not got anything planned currently for this moment for 2024. So Colleague is not entering a car. Trackhouse, there have been some conversations and maybe Shane Van Gisbergen can enter it. We already know that SVG is not going to be entering the Daytona 500. There was some chatter that maybe Julio Castroneves could enter Daytona 500 with this team, at least a slight chatter, but that basically has been denied at this point. And then you look at 2311 Racing. I thought maybe there's a chance that 2311 could enter third car. Now, we'll talk about 2311 here in just a minute, but 2311 Racing, there was maybe some possibilities they can enter a third car. A lot of people wanted that. Maybe as somehow getting Eric Almirola to drive in that seat, maybe getting a couple of drivers like Chandler Smith, Sheldon Creed, maybe Carl Edwards out of nowhere to come out of retirement, but that doesn't surprise me. As for NY Racing, it's interesting that their name continues to be brought up in the rumor mill for potentially running the Daytona 500. They haven't run a NASCAR race since 2022. The last time they ran was with Greg Biffle. And if they were to return to NASCAR, maybe Greg Biffle does come out of retirement and ends up driving in that seat. Again, because Greg has indicated that he's interested in maybe making a return. But as of right now, that's not going to be the case. Which it sounds like to me right now that there'll be 41 to 42 cars entering the Daytona 500 if all of this is true. Now, the biggest thing to note is the reason being why I think there's less teams entering this year than other years is because Atlanta's right after, and you have to remember that there's two straight there's back-to-back super speedway dates happening in 2024, which I think is the biggest and hugest reason why this is going on currently at the moment, why you're seeing less teams show up. It is disappointing nonetheless, though, that there are going to be less teams at the Daytona 500 this year. You want more teams showing up. I remember going back to 2007, where you had, 62 entries that showed up, and now you're only having 42 at the most. Honestly, if only 41 or 42 show up, we should probably at this point just let everybody race. I don't think 2 extra cars would hurt anything at this point. But as of right now, unfortunately, it sounds like there is only going to be 41 to 42 cars entering. And it sounds like that we may only have 1 or 2 cars going home this year. At least people are going to be going home this year in the Daytona 500. But unfortunately, not as many entries are going to be showing up in the Daytona 500 as we had initially thought. And now we're going to ahead jump on to the first of 2 major stories of today's episode as we're talking about 23XI Racing. Now, earlier today, Steven Tarrant, who works at CBS Sports, actually was in a video conference with multiple reporters, including Bob Pockrass, and also the president of Toyota Racing Development, David Wilson. And he actually asked him about maybe bringing the number 67 car back, and there's been some conversations about maybe bringing Kamui Kobayashi back to drive a number 67 car in 2024. And according to David Wilson, apparently there's something like that is being worked on, and they may be running a third car at some point in the 2024 season. Now, it does need to know, like I've already mentioned a second ago, that 23XI Racing is not planning to run this car in the Daytona 500. But last year, 23XI Racing did run the number 67 car for 2 races. They ran it in the Daytona 500 with Travis Pastrana. Travis, respectively, I believe, finished in 11th or 12th place. Crashed on the last lap, of course, after getting turned by Eric Almirola. And then, of course, clipping Kyle Larson and causing that really bad accident in wreck. But also, they did run this car at Kamui Kobayashi. I thought this car was going to run a lot better than it ended up running. And unfortunately, the car ended up running a little bit like crap. So it didn't run amazing, and Kamui kind of struggled. But it sounds like they're going to run this car again at some point. Now, who could be behind the wheel? Well, I think about potential possibilities. Obviously not Kurt Busch, because Kurt Busch is retired. Maybe Carl Edwards, and probably not at this point, at least for the second time being. I would think Eric Almirola maybe gets a chance. Maybe Chandler Smith, maybe Sheldon Creed do end up driving the seat. But let's say there's drivers from maybe TRD's World Endurance Championship group they're looking at, because I think they're going to use this potentially as like a Project 91 entry. You've got Kamui Kobayashi, who could be a possibility. You've also got a couple other drivers. Nick DeVries, who's joined Toyota, could be a possibility. What about Lewis Hamilton? Denny Hamlin, remember, at the Las Vegas Grand Prix about a month or 2 ago, he spoke to Lewis Hamilton and was in the paddock. He was speaking to Lewis Hamilton. So maybe Lewis Hamilton could be the surprise driver. What about Sebastian Buemi? Sebastian Buemi's been mentioned. What about other drivers that are part of Toyota's camp? Maybe like a Nick Tandy or somebody perhaps who's part of Toyota's camp. I would love to see a lot of different drivers coming from Toyota and work with this team. Again, I think Royo Haraka, Brendan Hartley, I think maybe as well, is still part of that Toyota Gazoo Racing group. So maybe he could go after him perhaps. But as of right now, I think there's a few names that have to get mentioned. I think Lewis Hamilton and maybe Valentino Rossi too could be another name that gets used. We already know that Bubba Wallace has wanted Lewis Hamilton to come over. So maybe Lewis Hamilton is a surprise driver that could run in this upcoming season. It is going to be very interesting to see how things generally play out when it does come to 23XI Racing and if they do enter a car. But again, the more cars enter races, the better it's going to be. I do predict that this car will likely run around 4 to 5 NASCAR Cup Series races in the 2024 season. And my early prediction right now is Lewis Hamilton has to be the front runner. I think a lot of us want to see Carl Edwards come back for sure, but as of right now, I don't think he's coming back at this time being, but I think we all want to see him return. But I also want to see Eric Almirola get a chance to run a cup with this team. Maybe a couple other drivers in the lower series get a chance. But as of right now, I think the current plan is for the car to run at some point. They're teasing a big announcement coming relatively soon, and hopefully we'll find out who that driver is here in the not-so-distant future. I hope it's a really good driver that is good, who knows what they're doing behind the wheel. We'll find out here hopefully soon, though, in the not-so-distant future, who will be in this third 23XI Racing car. Again, I know 23XI Racing has stated publicly they do want to eventually expand 23XI Racing a 3 or 4 car team. They've got that shop they just built called Airspace, and I think that it's really cool. They've got that shop going, and now they potentially could house maybe some more teams in the not-so-distant future. So we'll see how things end up working out, but 23XI Racing is teasing potentially having a third car in the near future. We'll see who they end up driving and bring, if they do, in fact, bring the number 67 car back in 2024. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about OEMs. Now, this has been a conversation that's been going on over the course of the last couple of years. But earlier today, Jerry Joy from KickingTheTires.net put out basically a tweet indicating that there is starting to be a lot more interest from potential new manufacturers that could join the sport. Jerry Jordan says that there is interest from manufacturers to joining NASCAR once again. Now, this has been a conversation that has been going on over the course of the last 2 years. I remember back a few years ago, back in 2020 and 2021, where NASCAR stated publicly in late 2022 that they were having potential conversations with Dodge about potentially joining the sport. Now, obviously, those talks kind of quilled in the middle portion of 2023. But remember, Dodge had actually spoken to RFK Racing about working with them, but unfortunately, those deals unfortunately fell through. And Dodge, because of some certain things they've been doing behind the scenes with their group, they unfortunately did not come through, at least as of right now. But maybe not too far down the road, Dodge can make a potential return, because Dodge has not been around since 2012, but they were talking about coming into 2013. They had a Genesis car ready to go with Andretti Autosport, and they were going to have Kurt Busch and also potentially Matt Kenseth behind the wheel of an Andretti Autosport car as well. But now we're starting to hear a little bit of chatter about Honda. Remember, I talked about this on the channel recently. Honda is interested as of recently on joining NASCAR. And this is the first time we've heard it publicly stated that Honda could join, because remember, there's a lot of situations going on with IndyCar right now when it comes to the hybrid situation. Honda is threatening to leave IndyCar by the end of 2026 if IndyCar does not get the hybrid system going. Now, granted, Honda could just go ahead and leave IndyCar and go focus on their full-time Formula One route, which of course they're going to be working with Aston Martin full-time in 2026, because remember, we all know that Red Bull and Racing Bulls, I think it is going to be working with Ford in the 2026 season. But again, there's a lot of talk right now that they are going to be leaving if things don't get figured out. But they also mentioned about coming to NASCAR. Now again, if they were to join NASCAR potentially, they would have to get a car for the Cup Series, whatever will be the secondary series after 2024, and also for the Craftsman Truck Series as well, which I think they do have a couple cars. I think like the Ridgeline would be one thing they would use. I think that's still something that is being used by Honda currently at the moment. And of course with Honda, they got the Audacity and a couple other brands and companies that they do have part of there as well. But I think another reason you're seeing interest is they want to basically a little more cost cutting. There could be some other manufacturers who do come in the future outside of Honda. We may see Nissan join in the near future. But the biggest goal of this next-gen car, the biggest goal that NASCAR has had, is bringing a new manufacturer in. And if NASCAR can bring a new manufacturer in with the next-gen car, I think that would basically be able to draw in, because NASCAR, like I said, has not had a new manufacturer actually join the sport in nearly 2 decades. Toyota, while they've only been in Cup since 07, it's been like 17 years now, they've been in NASCAR for 20 years. They joined in the Truck Series all the way back in the year 2004. So there's not been a new manufacturer in NASCAR in 20 years, and NASCAR's been pushing and pushing and pushing to get a new manufacturer in, but unfortunately, they've not been able to come through. So at this point, if it isn't those manufacturers, who else could be coming? Maybe BMW, maybe some of the companies like Cadillac. Obviously, we don't know what the future of Chevy's going to look like. Maybe Cadillac in some shape or form comes in and replaces and works and takes over for Chevy, but I don't think that's going to happen. But maybe Cadillac joins in and GM has a second manufacturer that's working with the GM branding. That certainly could be a possibility and definitely an option for sure. But it's really cool to see that there is conversation about some new OEMs that might be coming in. We've been hearing some rumors. We've been hearing some chatter that this is something that has been worked on behind the scenes with some potential new OEMs that maybe could come in the next 2 years. Again, it's going to take a few years for development to come through and a few years for things to work out. But maybe, just maybe, we'll see a new OEM and a new manufacturer come in. I want to see a new manufacturer, man. We've been waiting a long time for this. We've been hearing this for the last couple years. At this point, I want to see a manufacturer put up or shut up at this point and just join. I actually think it will happen this year, though. I predict the Honda is going to come into the sport by the end of 2024, announce they're joining, and they will have a car in 2026, and they'll have something, because again, Honda continues talking about this. We've heard this over the last couple of years. I think Honda is going to be that said manufacturer that is going to end up, in fact, making a jump over to NASCAR, joining the NASCAR Cup Series, the Secondary Series, and the Truck Series. I predict Honda will be that said manufacturer. So, that is your today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. What manufacturers do you want to see join NASCAR? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And who do you think will drive the second 2311 racing car? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Tomorrow on the channel, I'm not entirely sure what's going to be out. There's a lot of content that is going to be coming out, though, over the course of the next few weeks. There is going to be a silly season moves video on all the NASCAR silly season moves dropping in the next couple days. There will be the Truck and Xfinity Series driver lineup videos dropping relatively soon. And there's also a lot of other content, like potentially a sponsor silly season video and also Farmer Motorsports team preview that more than likely will be dropping really, really soon on this channel. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.